Hello everyone and welcome back to Spirit of Thersites. This is the second video that I've made tonight, but it will be the first one that you see. Actually, it's the third video, but one of them was on my main channel. I'm trying to upload a few things in advance of going on break to visit my family, so I figured, why not jump into presidential politics? I've dipped my toe in those waters before, so why the hell not? Today we're looking at an article by Cilizza. Well, it's called an analysis, but that is a stretch. I'm just going to call it an article, pure and simple. And it is called 11 Democrats Who Could Replace Joe Biden in 2024. But before we get into this, I'd just like to comment that it has been a while since I've been active on this channel because I've been very busy. I was actually going to record an episode of my tier ranking of officials by state, and I was actually going to do it with someone in person who was visiting me, but we got too busy doing other stuff because of him bringing a lot of his pets, so yeah, we didn't get to do that, but we will get around to that probably in early January. So that series is still ongoing. In terms of other channel news, I don't really have any, except that I do plan to try to be more regular on this channel. There are some pieces of good news to go along with the terrible news that the BBB has completely died. One piece of good news that striking workers at Kellogg basically won, so that's a positive thing. And in general, it looks like labor's in a better position than it's been in a while. But politically speaking, in terms of electoral politics, things are dire. And a lot of that has to do with Joe Biden being well past his expiration date. That, and he is a man who has always been a tool of the banks. Even if he were at 100%, he would not be a very good president. But at, say, 70% or whatever he's at, he is completely incompetent. One of the things that he sold himself on during both the primary and the general is that he can get things done. He's got a lot of friends in the Senate. He knows how to grease the wheels. Here we are, and his primary agenda is completely dead. And it looks like he and his party will get massacred in 2022. Because of that, even establishment shills such as Cilizza realize that Biden probably needs to be replaced on the ticket. But before we get into the 11 people he proposes, I'd like to first talk about Joe Biden just trying it again. And also, someone has proposed the specter of a second Hillary run. Because Hillary probably is putting out feelers, and there was a Republican who wrote an article that the Democrats' best bet might be trying Hillary again. So to start with Joe Biden, the problem that he would have running against Trump, again, is that he promised to fundamentally change things, and he hasn't. He promised that he would be a breath of fresh air after Trump, and he isn't. He also will be even older and more decrepit in 2024 than he was in 2020. He was already looking pretty damn creaky at that time. So I don't really think he has it in him physically, mentally, emotionally. He's not going to have a track record to run on. If he keeps Harris on the ticket, she doesn't bring anything. If he drops her, then he has an opponent who might challenge him. I think that even if he decides to stick on the ticket, that he will get primaried. Even with the emphasis on party loyalty, I can't see Biden going unchallenged in a primary given just how weak he is right now. No one respects him or takes him seriously. He got bullied by Manchin and Sinema pretty effectively. The Republicans are refusing to work with him. He's not putting pressure on them to do otherwise. He learned nothing from being VP for 8 years under Obama dealing with this. He has no solution to the problem. He doesn't know how to use the bully pulpit. He doesn't know how to enforce party discipline. The man's fucking useless. So if he were to run again, I think he would lose. I don't think he'd get blown out, but I do think he would lose, and he would probably... Then again, Democrats are going to lose a lot of seats in 2022, so he might not actually lose many more congressional seats if he runs in 24. because the Democrats will already be at a low ebb. Senate-wise, I think the Democrats would lose a couple seats because 2018 was actually a decent year for them. So Biden could lose the Democrats a couple more Senate seats and the presidency. And he always told us that 2020 was the most important election of our lives, just like 2016. Well, I'm sure he'd say that in 2024, and then his message would be, "I'm not Trump." An inspiring message. And without COVID, I don't think it'd be enough. If not for COVID, I don't think that Biden beats Trump in 2020. Now Hillary Clinton, a proven loser, who lost to the presumptive 2024 nominee. Why run her again? I don't know. The article that was about that subject might have been a troll, and if it was serious, it was not well argued. Hillary would have some weight in a primary because she's got the name recognition, she's got connections, but so do a lot of other people now. Hillary's prestige was damaged by losing the election, and many voters will be wary of backing someone who literally lost to the same person that she's running against again. And trying to pick up after Biden will be a much more difficult task than trying to pick up after Obama, who left office fairly popular. So with someone who has Hillary's negatives trying to run after a president who has a super low approval rating, assuming that it stays low, of course, that is a tall task, and it would demand a much more skilled politician than Hillary Clinton. Someone with charisma, someone who actually has differences on policy, and Hillary doesn't have those things. So Hillary would be disastrous. I don't actually think she could win the nomination, even with the party largely being her acolytes. So a lot of the people in power in the party, I mean. Even then, I just don't think that even the Democratic faithful, who usually do the bidding of the establishment, will be willing to carry that kind of water. So, let's look at Cilizza's 11. Let's look at his so-called analysis. Combined, President Joe Biden's age will be 82 shortly after the 2024 election and his ongoing political struggles. He's mired in the low 40s in job approval, and you get this, a series of stories examining whether Biden runs again, and if not, who might take his place. Yeah, so at least he's honest about the fact he's just cashing in. We're in the midst of just one of those news cycles. The New York Times published a big takeout on the potential Biden replacements within the Democratic Party the weekend. The White House, where the whispers made clear Biden is planning to go for a second term. The president has every intention of running for re-election, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said on Monday. Heard she makes good cookies. But what if Biden's plans change? Below, a look at the most commonly mentioned names for 2024 contenders and a single line on their viability. Now, this is going to be a depressing list because Chris Cilizza, being an establishment guy, will only pick corporate moderates. He has no interest in looking at anyone who is remotely interesting. Actually, I see Warren on here. I guess she'd be the one exception. But even she, I think there's a good case to be made that she is somewhat compromised based on how she ran her 2020 campaign. And also sat out 2016 when she probably could have taken that from Hillary. Alright, we have Kamala Harris. She's undoubtedly struggled as vice president, but she's still the most likely Democrat not named Biden to wind up as the Democratic nominee in 2024. I disagree. Harris would have an institutional advantage by being VP, and normally a VP would get that nomination without too much of a fight. The problem is that Harris is woefully incompetent, politically speaking. She struggled mightily in 2020. She had a lot of positive coverage from the press, so she became, in her own words, a top-tier candidate due to advertising, free advertising, that is, through the press, and also by virtue of being from California, which has a massive media market. And yet, despite being a candidate who fits all the criteria of a party obsessed with identity politics, Harris failed to catch on with voters completely. She was completely rejected by black voters, actually, because that was the demographic she was going for. But she's not accepted as fully black by black voters because she's not DDoS. So that failed miserably. And California didn't give a shit that she was running either, so her own home state was not interested in her. Partly that's because the kind of favorite son, favorite daughter politics of the past is dead, and people tend to be nationally engaged. So the Democrats deliberately moved up the California primary to help her, and she just lost in embarrassing fashion. She had to drop out to avoid having that quantified officially. So she's completely unviable, and she's another person I can't see her winning a primary. She's very inconsistent in debates. She doesn't really stand for anything. Her track record as a prosecutor is limited. And there were actually rumors weeks back that Biden might try to put her on the Supreme Court in order to prevent her from running and inevitably losing. And even though she's not at all remotely qualified to be on the court. But that's neither here nor there. Next up, we have Pete Buttigieg. Alright, so remember, CNN is the only reason why Pete is a household name in America at this point. CNN was his campaign. Without CNN, he would just be the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, that no one cares about. But instead, he did surprisingly well in the first two contests and then flamed out. The most naturally talented candidate in the 2024 field, Mayor Pete, has also been front and center selling Biden's infrastructure bill. Pete has no natural talent for politics. None. He's better than Harris, I guess, in terms of pressing flesh and appearing knowledgeable about policy, but the guy is so rehearsed and fake that he really only appeals to old people who are easily duped. He's basically an 80-year-old in what a 40-year-old's body. The only difference between him and Biden is that he doesn't have dementia in many ways. But unlike Biden, who has a bit of personality and some quirks, Pete is robotic. He made a documentary about himself where he appears to be completely unloving and unfeeling, even when dealing with his husband. His idea of an intimate moment is basically he just stares at his husband when he says, "I'm tired" or "I'm feeling bad." He doesn't offer any comfort, no expression, no hand pat, nothing. I mean, this guy is cold as ice. Naturally talented? Get the fuck out of here. Pete Buttigieg... oh, God. Anyway, so the CNN effort to make Pete a thing is still going on. And also, we have to remember that although many people have argued, and I think somewhat convincingly, that him going on paternity leave during the supply chain crisis doesn't have that much to do with his job as transportation secretary, that's a hard case to make to the average voter. To really get into the intricacies of how that works, if you have to explain why the transportation secretary is not involved in transportation by talking about bureaucracy, that's just not good. And if you have to explain it away to that extent, well, that's almost a non-starter in of itself because most people do not have that kind of an attention span. And I'm not fully convinced of the argument to begin with, but even if you are one of the people who fully accepts the idea that he had nothing to do with it and couldn't have done anything about it, still, it is not a good look, and it makes him appear to be just someone padding his resume, which he is. He doesn't know shit about transportation. By his own admission, by the way. Okay, next up we have Elizabeth Warren. Massachusetts senator is still popular among liberals, and wouldn't be splitting the vote with Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders this time around like she did in 2020. The problem is that Warren would have to have a very solid backing from the left to have any chance, and then she would need some division among the other candidates. And she did a lot of damage to her chances because of that attempt at an attack against Bernie in 2020. Again, I think the best chance that she ever had was in 2016, where Hillary was planning on running a woman campaign, and then Warren could have run as a woman, as someone who's more of an outsider, has less negatives, who could get the left vote, who had new ideas, would actually be something other than Obama's third term. So Warren could have struck a difference and negated Hillary's most predictable attacks. And Hillary would have come across as vicious when she inevitably went negative in the primary because they were supposed to be friends. So, Warren blew her chance. And Bernie would have gladly backed her in 2016, and most people would have no idea who he is today. But he decided to run as a protest candidate and came close because Hillary was that vulnerable. Had it been Warren instead of Bernie, I think she probably wins in 16. But that's just me. The problem with Warren, of course, as she showed in 2020, is that her political instincts are trash. She has no political ability in the sense of traditional politics in terms of electioneering. That is not her strong suit. I guess you could say, in Chris Cilizza's terms, she is not naturally talented. She's got some good policy ideas in a lot of ways, and she's good at talking about some things that are fairly technocratic, but it doesn't translate with most people. Now, I don't think she's a serious contender, and I also don't know if she's planning on running or not. Next up, we have Amy Klobuchar. Other than Buttigieg, the Minnesota senator was probably the best regarded of the losing candidates in 2020, and if her Midwest roots are always a plus given the electoral map. Well regarded by CNN, by the establishment, by moderates, by corporatists. Klobuchar probably has a better chance than anyone we've talked about so far. Partly because, she's a Midwesterner, she's fairly experienced, she doesn't have the long track record of being the subject of attack the way that, say, Hillary does, or she's not known as a complete moron like Kamala. She doesn't come across as being quite as fake as Pete, although her hair in a blizzard thing was really goddamn terrible. So, Klobuchar, she would have a chance, I guess. I don't think she ever cracked much beyond 5 or 6% last time. In a less crowded field, maybe she gets somewhere. But the problem with Klobuchar is that she's more Biden-esque in the sense that she's more someone people settle for than someone who really attracts enthusiasm. So she wins by attrition. And she does have some negatives that didn't come up because she never quite got popular enough. For instance, her constant abuse of staffers, her reputation as someone who can be abusive and difficult to work for. That will definitely be something that she'd get hit for in both the primary and in general if she actually, took off. I don't know if that would be fatal or not. My suspicion is not. But it still would be something that would require some political skills to navigate. And I'm not convinced that she really has that many political skills. She's not super talented, to use the Cilizza term. Although she has some degree of talent. She would basically run, I'm a minimally competent candidate, vote for me, I'm less shitty than the alternative campaign. And she does that a little better than a lot of the other people who did the same campaign in 2020. She ran a better campaign than, say, the two Colorado senators who tried the same thing but did it more crappily. She ran a better campaign than the Homer Simpson-looking guy who was just trying to live a meaningful midlife crisis, right? Delaney, there we go. Next up we have Roy Cooper, term limited out of office in 2024. North Carolina governor has ample time to consider his next step, starting with the service as the vice chairman of the Democratic Governors Association. The problem with Cooper is that the Republicans have decided from the moment he got elected to go pure obstructionist, so he has no accomplishments. And he would be trying to replace a president who was similarly stymied by obstructionism. So one thing he would get hammered on by other candidates and by voters in a primary is, we're dealing with gridlock right now, and you have a proven inability to do anything about it. I think that would be fatal. I don't know how he gets beyond that point. Because gridlock is going to be a major issue, just as it is right now, and Cooper's track record suggests very strongly that it is a problem that he can't solve. Next up, we have Mitch Landrieu. With Sean, we're here for this one. Being tasked with implementing the infrastructure bill is a big and high-profile job that the former New Orleans mayor has taken to with relish. That infrastructure bill is dog shit. It implements more toll roads. Tolls are about as popular as cancer. They slow down transportation. They're deeply inconvenient. It's a way to bilk people and to keep taxing them literally every time they use a fucking road. If Landrieu's name becomes nationally relevant because of that, that can't be good. Also, if we look at what he's known for, he was mayor of New Orleans, which is like the 60th largest city in America. So he didn't really get much exposure as mayor. His sister's a former senator, but it's Louisiana, so it's a state that's unwinnable for Democrats, and her reputation is just kind of meh. The state's known for rampant corruption. If there are investigations into Mitch Landrieu's past, he probably has some corruption. If he doesn't, his sister probably does, or his dad who's in politics. So Mitch has a lot of liabilities. He's mostly known for taking down a few Confederate statues in the city of New Orleans. That is an issue most people don't give a flying fuck about. Because most people don't live in cities with Confederate monuments, one. But also that issue has crested in terms of its prominence. It really isn't something that people are talking about right now. And although Landrieu was, I guess, the pioneer of that, it really, again, it trying to bring that up and say, oh yeah, Mitch Landrieu took down some statues in a city that many of you have never been to, and also he established toll roads. How do you think that's going to play? That's a shitty campaign. That's a neoliberal campaign defined. And I think that there is a growing disdain for neoliberalism, even among more normie Democrats. They don't know the term, they don't quite understand it, but yeah, when you present them with that as a resume, I don't think that is going to land. Unless Landrieu gets the Pete treatment and CNN just starts polishing his knob nonstop. Starting now. Next up we have Gina Raimondo, who is actually the person on this list I'm by far the least familiar with. She made the leap from Rhode Island governor to Biden administration commerce secretary, but doubts remain as to whether she is too moderate to win a Democratic primary in this moment. Well, she's from Rhode Island. That's going to be the next state that I cover in my ranking. But I didn't look into her at all because she's no longer governor. If Cilizza says that she's too moderate to win a Democratic primary, then she must be basically a blue Republican. A dino. Because Cilizza is worried usually about people being too far left. So he's worried about her being too far right. Then I can only imagine what her record is. And yeah, I mean, Biden, one of his problems, one of the things that will define him is that he didn't do fucking anything. So there won't be a mood of, let's try someone like Biden, but younger. That's not going to be what the mood will be among the primary voters, so Raimondo is, yeah, it's not going to work. And Commerce Secretary, it's a powerful job, just like Transportation Secretary, but that's not prominent. I know people are, like, the people who are big fans of Pete are saying, oh, Transportation Secretary, that's the key to the presidency. No, it isn't. It really isn't. I mean, by that logic, Assistant Secretary to the Navy, which FDR held at one point, I mean, fuck, that's the coveted position. I think TR also held that position, I'm not sure though. Gretchen Whitmer, the Michigan governor, needs to win what could be a tough re-election race next year before she can turn considering a national election in earnest. Yeah, she's from Michigan. She survived an assassination attempt. She's got some things going for her. She does look a bit plastic because she's had a little too much not very high quality plastic surgery. She's not done nearly enough about the Flint water crisis. She ran on fixing it, and so far, not so good. She's basically allowed that to continue, which is kind of Biden-esque in the sense that she ran on one thing and didn't do it. So that will be a liability. I don't think she can carry Michigan with her, even if she wins re-election as governor. That being said, Michigan is still winnable for Democrats, obviously, but I don't know if she has any more pull in that state than average. I don't think her pull extends to, say, neighboring states. At least that's not the impression that I get. And part of it is because, again, she ran on being the savior of Michigan after the catastrophe of Snyder, and she hasn't done much. So unless she can really turn it around, I don't see much of a case for her. That being said, she's still one of the better people on this list so far. I would say that she's maybe tied with Klobuchar in terms of feasibility. Next up we have Phil Murphy, who I'm not familiar with at all. And that's part of why I keep doing that series on nationally relevant officials from each state. Just to plug my own shit again. The record of New Jersey governors running for president isn't great of late. Sorry, Chris Christie. But Murphy could use the next few years of his governorship as a testing ground for some national policies for the party. This is the first actual mention of policy in this piece. Chris Cilizza is very light when it comes to policy. I don't really know what Phil Murphy stands for. I don't really know much about his political history, so I can't comment much. All I can say is that he doesn't have very good name recognitions that would be a problem. And just like candidates from New York, candidates from New Jersey tend to be a bit beholden to Wall Street. So that can be both an asset in terms of fundraising and media market exposure, but also a liability because it's a corporatist, someone who will not tend to inspire a lot of enthusiasm, since all he'll talk about are probably social issues. He's not going to be willing to run on economic issues unless he's far different than what he seems to be, based on my very limited understanding of him. Next up, we have J.B. Pritzker. Pritzker has two things going for him. One, he's the governor of a major Midwestern state, Illinois, and two, he's very, very rich. Bloomberg showed that being rich is not enough. And we don't need any more eccentric billionaires running for office. People who are that rich have no meaningful connection with society. They don't really suffer under the same constraints or considerations as the rest of us. They can't really govern competently because of that reason. And also, it's going to be very hard for him to connect with people. Think about John Kerry, Mitt Romney. Most rich candidates don't do well. Trump was the exception because he's kind of white trash even though he's a billionaire. But Trump, it's funny, he actually holds most of his voters in complete contempt. But they don't know it. And last is Stacey Abrams. Abrams talked openly about running in 2020 before passing on the race, but she needs to win the Georgia governor's mansion in 2022 before thinking too much about 2024. Abrams is a quintessential example of someone whose ambition exceeds her ability. It's not clear exactly what she stands for. She talked about voting rights, but no one really disagrees on the Democratic side, so that's not really a very distinctive issue. She doesn't have a track record of success. She lost to Kemp. She doesn't have a clear place in the party in terms of what she stands for that makes her different. Basically, she's just a black woman from Georgia. That's what her whole political career is based on. But she hasn't proven the ability to win in Georgia, which kind of negates her value in many ways. I don't see why there are people who are so enthused about Abrams. She doesn't really stand for anything. She has not that many known stances. There's not much there. I actually don't think she has much political skill either, from what I've seen. And aside from becoming a media darling, which is mostly because of identity politics, just like with Tammy Duckworth, I've seen very little evidence that Abrams has average or much less above average ability. So I can't really see her running a breakout campaign. Actually, I think there's a good chance that no one on this list will be the nominee. My suspicion is that it will be sort of an obscure governor from somewhere, would be my guess. Maybe an ex-governor. Someone who's a little off the radar, who comes in with some energy, is kind of fresh, but also has a bit of a resume. I think someone will dark horse this, is what I'm saying. But the point, according to Chris Cilizza, whose segment is called The Point, is if Biden decides not to run, chances are we will be looking at a very crowded field of Democrats seeking to replace him. I'll go a step further than Mr. Cilizza. If Biden decides to run, there will still be at least a few Democrats who challenge him because he's very vulnerable. And also, someone will rise up from the left. That's one area that he ignored. I guess he covered it a little bit with Warren. But Warren might not still entertain presidential ambitions, one. And two, she's not a very viable candidate. So my guess is that some progressive who's not super well known might enter the race. The person who would have the best chance, if she were interested, would probably be Katie Porter. But I don't really get presidential aspiration vibes from her. AOC would technically be eligible, but should only be a bare 35. And I think that she'd be fearful that her youth would be held against her. So I think she would refrain from trying to run. I'm trying to think who else would be a prominent progressive who might potentially run. Jamal Bowman seems very ambitious, as does Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts and Ro Khanna from California. All of them seem ambitious enough to try to run. Ro isn't viable. Ro comes across as weak, so I don't think he's really an option. He's kind of the progressive Cory Booker in a way. I mean, better than Cory Booker, but he reminds me of Booker. He gives me a little bit of a Booker vibe. And also Cory Booker should probably be on this list. He clearly wants to be president. Beto could try again, I guess. I mean, Obama apparently likes Beto. Fun fact. I don't know. But yeah, there will be some challenger from the left. I just don't know who it will be. And depending on who it is, that will determine largely how well they do. Biden's failure and weakness means that he is not a lock to get nominated if he tries to run again. So, that is it for my coverage of Chris Cilizza's list of Democratic hopefuls. As always with Chris Cilizza, it's pretty shitty work, but it's something to talk about. Okay, I guess the next time I record on this channel will be after I get back, so look forward to that. And in the meantime, in between time, let me know in the comments if there are any topics you'd like me to talk about. So, yeah, let me know. Alright, this has been Spirit of Thersites. I am signing out. Good night, good luck, and have a happy holiday season. Especially New Year's, which is probably more fun than Christmas, if we're being honest.